Welcome back to Watch the Bookerman and to episode number 22 of Paul Heyman's TNA 2010. This is the go-home show to the Sacrifice pay-per-view, and after last week's, I will say, disappointing show, especially that main event, I really think that the major storyline developments should make sure that this is a really good go-home show. I've got a couple of segments to hype up the main event, and we'll get into that show right now. And we begin with footage from earlier today. An unfamiliar face over the last month, AJ Styles, pulls up at the building, or rather he's been driven to the building, making his first in-person appearance since losing the title. Styles is still wearing that medical walking boot that we saw in the interview last week, and as soon as he reaches the entrance, he is met by a doctor and by Paul Heyman. Heyman offers AJ Styles his hand, but AJ wants to know what's going on, why he's being greeted at the entrance. Paul tells AJ that he is more than welcome to be at the show. Nobody would ever stop AJ Styles from entering the Impact Zone, but on the advice of the doctor, AJ Styles must not get physical with anybody if he is to stand even a 1% chance of making it to Sacrifice. Paul Heyman wants that, AJ Styles wants that, Bobby Lashley wants that. He needs to follow the advice and not be stubborn. Having vowed to prove his in-ring capability last week, AJ Styles is clearly disappointed to be told this, but doesn't really protest the call. Instead, he continues on his way and enters the building. This is not going to be the last we see of AJ Styles on tonight, of course, but it's a decent way to open the show, a 74 rating, advancing the World Heavyweight Championship storyline, which we do want to add a little bit of heat to on this episode, and Paul Heyman is superb working without a script there, having the crowd in the palm of his hand the entire time. So that's the cold open to the show. We then get, of course, the credits, the commentators introduce us to the show, and then the opener, a superb match between Kurt Angle and Homicide. I do believe I set this as a street fight, as it should have been, yeah. It ended up being 12 minutes. Originally I had it set as 10 minutes, but the angle match ratio that I had by the end of the show had a little bit too many angles, so I've added a couple of minutes to some of the matches, and I suppose that makes Homicide look better, and also puts over that Kurt Angle's been through a fairly lengthy match just 3 nights before Sacrifice. It's an angle slam that scores the decisive fall. Of course, chairs, cookie sheets, kendo sticks, steel pipes, whatever weapons they want to use before we get to that finish. It's a really good performance from Kurt Angle. Decent from Homicide, who he's not been booked particularly well. We're going to see a storyline development with him very, very soon, so hopefully the idea I've got from Homicide, I think, can save his TNA career. I'd say it's that bad. If we don't go with this, I think he could have easily have been one of the people who leaves the company when their next contract comes up. We'll see how it goes, we'll see what the reaction to it is, but I'm thinking that this is the best direction for the Homicide character going forward. After the match, of course, the focus is on the World Heavyweight Champion, and he takes a microphone and calls out the number 1 contender, Mr. Anderson. Anderson does come down to the ring, but he tells Kurt that if he lays a hand on him, he'll have Big Rob to deal with. Big Rob isn't here, Mr. Anderson's taking that chance, and when he enters the ring, Kurt Angle gets in his face. Anderson quickly tries to back away, but Angle is not having it. He's going face to face with him again. He's trying to intimidate the challenger a little bit, and Mr. Anderson probably doesn't want to get into a fist fight with Kurt Angle, even if Angle's just been in that match. Once they get down to business, Angle has a proposal. Last week, Mr. Anderson put his arm around Kurt Angle's neck and threatened to choke him out, just like he had at Destination X, right? Kurt doesn't quite remember it that way, but if that's what Anderson thinks he can do again, then how about the World Heavyweight Championship match at Sacrifice is contested under submission-only rules. Against all odds, Kurt Angle made Mr. Anderson tap out, and Mr. Anderson makes the claim that at Destination X he did the same to Kurt. Angle says that you have to make your opponent tap, say I quit, or Anderson's favourite, put him to sleep. Initially, Anderson's bluff appears to have been called. He realistically wouldn't want to face Kurt Angle, but he has an idea. He says, so there's no pins, and Kurt nods. And there's no countouts, and Angle nods. And there's no disqualifications, Kurt Angle nods. This is the part that appeals to Mr. Anderson, and he eventually accepts the stipulation for the pay-per-view, so the main event, or the World Heavyweight Championship match at Sacrifice, will be a submission match. The idea being here that there's going to be 2 methods in play, 2 approaches in play. It's the same match, but Kurt Angle is going to be looking for that ankle lock to draw the submission out of Mr. Anderson, whereas Anderson, on the other hand, will probably be bringing weapons into play, perhaps using his contacts, the likes of Big Rob Terry and Homicide, and doing whatever it takes within his interpretation of the rules to find a way to put Kurt Angle to sleep, i.e., as he did at Destination X, knock him out, lock in a hold, and the referee will have no choice but to call for the bell. gaining heat to the storyline. It's not as good as I hoped it would have been. I did think that these two would be able to get an 80 plus segment to gain heat to the storyline, which it does, but not as much as I would have liked it to. We've got a few more segments in this storyline that this was really the one that I was banking on being a really good segment. It deserved better announcing, got the crowd hotter, so a decent segment, a good segment really, but a little bit underwhelming for what is supposed to be that final hook for the pay-per-view match, adding that stipulation in. Alyssa Flash is then interviewed in the back by Lauren Brooke and is asked about her match later tonight, scheduled to see her face Awesome Kong, and if Flash were to win that match, she would receive a shot at the Knockouts tag team titles at some point in the future, but there has been question marks as to whether she would be cleared to compete. All week we've been asking that question, and Flash confirms that she will not be able to compete tonight due to the injury sustained at the hands of Kong last week. Everybody knew this would happen, and Flash says that she was set up to fail. This so-called opportunity she was given was a sham, and there's no doubt that everybody knew she wouldn't be cleared tonight. Flash says that she will not forget Jimmy Jacobs' part in all this. She's feeling a little bit betrayed, having nearly joined the New Age, only now to be out against them, but is cut off mid-sentence by Daphne, and she says, "I'll do it." She goes on to say that Flash has been calling on her to step up for weeks, and she's just stood in the background, watching and listening and taking everything in, but she's ready. Daphne says that she will beat Awesome Kong tonight, and when Flash is cleared to compete, they will become the champions together. Daphne then heads off to prepare, having caught Flash off guard with her assertiveness in this segment. We've not really seen much of Daphne other than her being at ringside for Flash's matches, but now she's coming into her own and stepping up, and hopefully, in her eyes, she will be good enough to beat Awesome Kong tonight, although she will be the heavy underdog going into that match. Whether Daphne wins or not, that title match will not be happening at Sacrifice, and as a result we need another set of challengers for the Knockouts tag team titles. Taylor Wilde and Sarita's convincing victory over Lauren Brooke and Lacey Von Erich sees them confirmed as the number one contenders to the titles. A double underhook powerbomb from Sarita, enough to defeat Brooke. Brooke again being the weak link, significantly below her opponents, but Taylor Wilde and Sarita will face Kong and Hamada, and given the ratings they got, that should be a good match. They have faced off twice before. On the very first episode, that was when Awesome Kong and Hamada became the second ever Knockouts Tag Team Champions. And then at Genesis, I think they had their rematch. So that will be a third match between them. But I think it's been long enough, about 4 months, that we can forgive seeing another match between Awesome Kong and Hamada and Taylor Wilde and Sarita. And after the match, we add a little bit more of a wrinkle to the build to this match. I say build has been like a segment, but Sarita and Taylor Wilde each take a microphone from ringside and address being the last minute replacements for Sacrifice, sort of hinting that they feel like afterthoughts at the minute, and they're only there because Flash definitely won't be cleared for Sunday, so they had to make provisions. While they're happy with the opportunity, being first reserve was never their vision as a tag team. They spoke with each other this week, and while nobody will ever take away the fact that they were the first Knockout Tag Team Champions, that they were the trendsetters of this division, they both feel like they're at a crossroads in their careers. For that reason, they've made a pact, a mutual agreement that this Sunday is win or bust for them. If they beat Awesome Kong and Hamada, they'll become the two-time champions of the Knockouts Tag Team division, and if they lose, they will go their separate ways. Wilde and Sarita then hug in the ring, having put huge pressure on themselves and on the future of their team ahead of this Sunday's championship match. So it's going to go one of two ways, of course. Either we get new tag team champions and we transition the New Age into a different storyline, or Sarita and Taylor Wilde will go their separate ways, become two singles competitors in the Knockouts division, a division that does of course need bolstering, but we'll see how that goes at Sacrifice. Jeremy Borash then interviews Samoa Joe in the back. As they look to promote this show's main event, Samoa Joe will face Bobby Lashley. While this match is Lashley's first in over 4 months, JB asks if Joe is fully prepared for what Lashley might bring. He's been in a lot of MMA training. Does that mean that he is expecting a vastly different approach from Bobby Lashley? Joe says that it has been a long time, but he's more interested in Last Bound for Glory, something that's been playing on his mind. While Bobby Lashley won that match, this time he won't have Earl Hebner deciding whether he's had enough or not. That was supposed to be a submission match, and the referee made that call when Joe wasn't ready to give up. Before Joe can go deeper into his complaints about that, clearly it's been something that's played on his mind. Desmond Wolfe confronts him. Wolfe says that, like Bobby Lashley, he heard Samoa Joe running his mouth and bad-mouthing him last week. He says that everybody in TNA can see the company passing Samoa Joe by, and while he's about to end Jeff Hardy once and for all on Sunday, Samoa Joe is going to be sat at home in his pants. In fact, Samoa Joe probably won't even be home on Sunday because after what happens to him tonight, he's got Bobby Lashley right. He's probably going to be in a hospital bed before he's back in the ring. So a decent segment again, advancing the storyline, and we're continuing to sort of tease the Joe Desmond Wolfe feud. They have been in the ring together before. Samoa Joe beat Desmond Wolfe just before his Destination X title match against AJ Styles, but Desmond Wolfe did get that pinfall just a couple of weeks ago, so they've both defeated each other once, and of course there is seemingly a developing personal issue between them, but again we advance the Desmond Wolfe Jeff Hardy storyline with a good segment, so that's a pretty good sign. We then get footage from the aforementioned match between Bobby Lashley and Samoa Joe from Bound for Glory, and we do see that controversial finish. Lashley scored the victory, but it was because Earl Hebner made the call. Samoa Joe didn't tap out, he didn't say I quit, despite it being a submission-only match. He's going to try and right the wrong of that call. In his mind, it was a wrong call. Perhaps Earl Hebner felt he was protecting the competitor, but in tonight's main event, he will have the chance for some redemption. We then get a decent third match of the night, a decent reaction from the crowd as well, but subpar wrestling. The story of the match in 7 minutes and 24. This was another match that I had to add another minute on. I would have preferred it to have been maybe 5:40 or something like that, but it doesn't really matter. The idea probably plays out better over 7.5 minutes, that Daphne is so determined, she's doing her best for Alyssa Flash, but in the end it just isn't good enough. We get the victory for Awesome Kong there over Daphne. These two have faced in real life before, and I do think there's quite a good dynamic in the idea of Daphne trying to chop down the tree, but ultimately Awesome Kong is that good, as we see with her performance, that it's going to be very difficult to beat her. Awesome Kong and Daphne don't seem to click, so not a match that we should do too much in the future, but Jimmy Jacobs doing well at ringside. Alyssa Flash was also at ringside for the match. Awesome Kong and Hamada standing tall after it. This Sunday, they will defend the Knockouts Tag Team Championships against Sarita and Taylor Wilde. On the outside, Alyssa Flash stares across the ring, or rather through the ring, her and Jimmy Jacobs on opposite sides. It's clear that their relationship has further deteriorated, and the chances of Flash joining the New Age appear to be pretty non-existent at this point. It's a disappointing segment after the match, despite it being a decent match. Losing heat to this storyline. It's an ever fluctuating storyline really. It can probably get as high as the 50s, but go as low as the 30s, so not going to worry too much. It is just a middle of the road storyline at the minute. Bobby Lashley is then interviewed about his return to the ring in tonight's main event. Just 3 nights before Sacrifice, Lashley says that regardless of what AJ Styles says, there's no chance that that guy's going to be at Sacrifice, let alone clear to compete. Everybody in TNA has heard the extent of AJ Styles' injury, and that means that Lashley has a clear path to the World Heavyweight Championship at Slammiversary. With that said, since he won't be competing at the pay-per-view, he's ready for that Bound for Glory rematch that Samoa Joe seems to have been holding on for all these months. Joe's going to get the beating that he had reserved for AJ Styles, and maybe he will teach him to keep Lashley's name off of his tongue. As the interview looks to be over, Jeremy Borash gets something in his ear, and he's saying he's doing what he's coming where. We don't know who or what Jeremy Borash is talking about. Lashley asks him what's going on, but Borash turns away to continue to listen to the message. A furious Bobby Lashley, unhappy to have had his interview taken away from him, not so bothered about the interview, but the disrespect from somebody like Jeremy Borash to cut him off mid-interview and to deal with something else. The commentators do wonder what it could have been that provoked that. Before we move into the next segment, a really poor promo from Bobby Lashley. I'm delighted that whatever I did, I think I only rated this on Bobby Lashley and Samoa Joe off screen. Thankfully, it doesn't advance the World Heavyweight Championship storyline, because if it did, well, it would have been a serious problem. We then have Paul Heyman come out to the ring to end the first hour of TNA Impact, and he cuts a promo hyping up the Sacrifice pay-per-view. This is something that I've done on pretty much every pay-per-view. It's not that great of a segment, but it does advance a storyline, and confirming that he has been advised not to clear AJ Styles. He continues on to say that he is gutted by this news, but says that Bobby Lashley will be at the show, and that's where he'll be confirmed as the new #1 contender. As Paul continues, he is confronted by Jay Lethal. Jay Lethal has shown a different side to himself recently, and reminds Heyman of that talk that they had at the beginning of the year. They've never publicly spoke about what went on in that meeting, but Jay Lethal wants to reveal it for the first time right now. He's got nothing to lose, but on the first show of the year, he was the first ever guy. Him and his partner Austin Creed were the first 2 guys ever pulled into Paul Heyman's office. Not only because Paul Heyman saw potential in them, but because he thought that they were not living up to their hype. Paul made them an ultimatum, and Jay says that him and his best friend were told they had two options: to get serious, to start stepping on toes, to prove that they deserve their place in TNA, or they'd be fired. Jay Lethal says that he took that to heart and he feared for his job, and then he realised that he is one of the best wrestlers in the world, and no matter what he's done for all 5 months, it's got him nowhere. He's worked his socks off in the ring to be the best, so now he's not asking anymore, he's demanding to be added to Abyss versus Matt Morgan. The match at Sacrifice should be a 3-way. He was screwed by Matt Morgan, he was attacked by Abyss, he's furious, and he demands that Paul Heyman puts him in that match against those two monsters, and he will prove exactly how good he is. Paul likes Jay's attitude here and tells him that he'll agree to add him to the match. He warns Jay Lethal that he may not be sure what he's getting himself in for, but it's going to be a 3-way at Sacrifice for the Global Championship. So Paul Heyman coming across well, the commentators helping us, and the angle successfully getting the crowd hotter. So a successful segment there, and hopefully we continue to build Jay Lethal as somebody who is so hungry, so passionate, so hard working, but he's just not getting that break. Will Sacrifice be that opportunity against two of the toughest guys in TNA in the shape of Matt Morgan and Abyss? Heading to the back to end the first hour of Impact, AJ Styles is shown for the second time. This is seemingly what the issue with Jeremy Borash was, because there's an incident unfolding where AJ Styles is being blocked from entering the locker room. There's reason to believe that he was a little bit fired up. Perhaps he wanted to start things with Bobby Lashley again, and he's told that he cannot enter the locker room. He's not cleared. It wouldn't be safe. We know what the TNA locker room's like. There's a pretty good chance that he'd be hurt if he got in there. Hearing the commotion, Big Rob Terry sticks his head out of the door. Forgot to put him on screen, unfortunately, but he is there. Yeah, I think he's Mr. Anderson's manager, so technically he would have been there anyway. Soon after, Mr. Anderson comes out to make light of the situation. Obviously, Big Rob's told him what's going on, but AJ grows even more frustrated. Anderson maintaining that air of being above it all. Some of his comments in the last few weeks have sort of hinted at that, his X Division stuff, talking about Shark Boy, but that's kind of something that I want to be Mr. Anderson's character, that he's quite aloof, that he looks down on TNA almost, that it's just that detached personality that he's always had, and I really think that'll work well as a detestable heel, as he casually just strikes up a conversation with the security team. Again, this is such an important thing to AJ Styles being cleared for Sacrifice, but to Anderson it's just something to shrug off. AJ Styles hears this and asks Anderson what his problem is. He's obviously pissed off that he's just kind of taking the mick. Anderson looks to de-escalate the situation and tells AJ Styles that the two of them have a lot in common. They're the only guys to have beaten Kurt Angle this year for one, and the only guys to have beaten Bobby Lashley in his whole TNA career. Perhaps they're the ones who will make the perfect Slammiversary main event. The only problem being that Anderson is going to be cleared for Sacrifice, and he is going to beat Kurt Angle where it really matters, whereas AJ Styles, not so much. So Mr. Anderson again mocking AJ Styles a little bit there, and the idea here is that we've got the dynamic between Lashley and Angle. We've of course got the scheduled matches that may or may not take place between Lashley and AJ and Kurt Angle and Mr. Anderson. So we're kind of completing that square by having some interaction between AJ Styles and Mr. Anderson, with the hint that potentially, whether it's Kurt Angle and Bobby Lashley for the title, whether it's AJ Styles and Mr. Anderson for the title, or maybe it's a different combination, there's rivalries and threads to pick at between all four of the options, if you know what I mean. So regardless of the results at Sacrifice, even if you have a particular combination that you're expecting, there's still enough there that we could go in any of the four directions for this storyline, and that's the end of the first hour of TNA Impact. Returning to the second hour of the show, the upcoming match is previewed with a video package. Recently, Kazarian and Daniels added Matt Morgan to their ranks, forming the Bad Influence stable, a group that has run roughshod over the roster since lockdown. Their dominant month has seen them make a number of enemies, including the two men they'll face tonight. 2 weeks ago, Bad Influence were confronted by Abyss and Hernandez, with Matt Morgan and Kazarian now both in action. 3 nights before they compete in championship matches at Sacrifice. Of course, Abyss himself will be defending the Global Championship in a match that had great heat and good wrestling. It's a 66 rating as Abyss and Hernandez defeat Kazarian and Morgan by disqualification. Daniels getting involved as it looks like Abyss, the Global Champion, is about to pin Kazarian. We can pretty much say that Abyss and Hernandez would have won had Daniels not got involved. Decent performances there. Abyss, the standout performer, Kazarian with his hot new move, and Abyss having a gimmick which is getting stale, which I'd say is probably fair, and the direction that I have for him will probably be enough that I can change the gimmick. But it's interesting there. I wonder if anybody agrees that this run is getting a little bit stale just of him beating everybody. He's not, as has been said before, had that much character and storyline development. It's just been a case of putting over how dominant he is. Fitting for the game there to say that his gimmick's getting stale. But after the match, Bad Influence continued to lay into Abyss, with the assault carrying on until Roderick Strong and Kazuchika Okada run down to make the save. The two men who had faced off last week present a united front, no issues seemingly from the meddling of Kazarian, but they still can't cope with the numbers of Daniels, Kazarian and Matt Morgan. While they do put up a fight, they too are taken down by Bad Influence, who once again show their strength as a trio. There's now 4 men laid out in their wake. Kazarian puts his foot on the chest of Roderick Strong, raising his championship in the air, very much a show of dominance. Kazarian does not see much of a threat from Roderick Strong in this X Division Championship match. What's he done in TNA has been his question as these two have began their rivalry. Morgan sees this and picks up the Global Championship, also placing his boot on Abyss's chest. Daniels in the middle, the first man to stand over Abyss during 2010. Morgan is nonetheless more focused on Jay Lethal. He wants to send a message to him and looks directly down the camera, telling the third man in this Sunday's Global Championship match that the gold is coming home with Bad Influence. That image we see of Daniels in the middle, Morgan with the Global Championship and Kazarian with the X Division Championship, is that something that we are going to see more of going forward? Not a very good segment of 56. Okada not coming out of this looking well because he was rated on his overness, which is significantly lower than everybody else's. Hernandez and Abyss though doing well while getting beaten up. We then cut to the back, and this is what I was mentioning before about Homicide. We see him sat in the locker room. He's looking a bit dejected, still clearly feeling the effects of his match with Kurt Angle earlier. Homicide is approached by D'Angelo De Niro, who of course is pretty hostile towards him, but Homicide for once isn't in the mood for a fight. This is pretty noteworthy, seeing that Homicide is most commonly seen swinging that steel pipe at anybody and everybody. De Niro speaks to Homicide and tells him to look at himself right now. He's choosing Homicide's lowest moment to go right back after him, to look at what he's become. Pope says that he called him fake, and he said that Pope turned his back on the streets. But look at Homicide right now. He's doing the bidding of a man who wants to destroy the TNA that we all know, the TNA that Homicide helped build. And he specifically targeted the X Division. Homicide has held that title. He's been in the X Division. He knows that that is what made TNA tick for so long. And Homicide is not liking hearing this, but he's just so deflated from his defeat. It's almost like Pope is getting through to him. Homicide's career is not going as he may have expected it in this new era, and it's a surprise that he doesn't lash out. He just sits and takes it. The Pope says that Homicide's silence speaks volumes, but this has gone beyond a personal issue between Homicide and D'Angelo. He's not even angry anymore. He feels sorry for Homicide. What he does today will be remembered as his legacy forever, and he asks Homicide if he's happy being known as Mr. Anderson's bitch for the rest of his life. So D'Angelo De Niro almost verbally berating Homicide to the point where you might even feel some sympathy for Homicide. It's not a great segment, but the context of what it means for Homicide's character, hopefully going forward, will be something that will make it maybe a key segment in the career of Homicide here in TNA. We'll see as that unfolds. We then get a composite, I don't know if that's the right word, but an interview that puts together interviews with Tara, Angelina Love and Madison Rayne, which were recorded early in the week, and then we sort of splice between them, with each of the knockouts putting over the title three-way at Sacrifice. The champion Tara and her two challengers, Angelina Love and Madison Rayne, all give their thoughts on each other ahead of the match. Tara's quite magnanimous, focusing on the fact that she wants to retain her championship and continue being one of the top names in the division. Angelina Love, on the other hand, takes shots at everybody, including her best friend Velvet Sky, who she's not even sure if she wants her at ringside this Sunday. Madison Rayne speaks about a new chapter in her life and in her career, and says that Sacrifice is the perfect opportunity for her to show everybody how much she belongs at the top of this Knockouts division. So it's again not a great segment, losing heat to the storyline. Seeing that too much tonight, to be honest. This was supposed to be the kicker, the one that really sells you on the pay-per-view, and half the storylines are losing heat and half of them gaining heat. We're happy to see in this match gaining heat, a really good match between Brian Kendrick and Robert Roode that goes over 15 minutes. We just sent them out to have, I think, a steal the show match, and it does. That's comfortably the best match on the night, I think. Can't remember what Kurt Angle got out of Homicide, but I'm thinking it wasn't as good as this. But it is another victory for the Hooligans as Brian Kendrick rolls up Robert Roode after 15 minutes. Roode setting up for the fisherman's suplex that he used to do, and Brian Kendrick hooking the leg and rolling him up for the surprise cradle. Brian Kendrick with a 63, Robert Roode with a 69, but because of their chemistry and getting the crowd buzzing, we get a 72 rating, which I'm really happy with, and it gains heat to the storyline, which is definitely something we needed, although this segment then loses heat to it. I think hopefully that should have settled in the high 60s maybe. It's probably just 64, but the Hooligans celebrate in the ring as the World Tag Team Champions back up the ramp. While furious with another defeat, the way Beer Money clutch onto their titles as they leave shows their priorities going into the Sacrifice pay-per-view. Maybe they'll lose a couple of battles on the way, but the war is Sacrifice and retaining the titles. When Beer Money reach the top of the ramp, Brian Kendrick takes a microphone. He mocks Robert Roode and James Storm and says that these two bitter little stoners have beaten them in back-to-back weeks and they'll do it again at Sacrifice. Paul London adds that by doing that, they'll end this sham of a title reign and draw a line under this feast or fired BS once and for all. So London improvising well there. From what was a heel v heel match, I think we've got something of a dynamic between Brian Kendrick and Paul London and Beer Money. I think that we have positioned London and Kendrick as the more likeable of the two duos, having a bit of a laugh and mocking Beer Money where they can, of course. Beer Money hopefully are quite a hated team due to their actions over the last few months, but we go then into the final hype, and again this was something I wanted. I thought Kurt Angle cutting a promo just before the pay-per-view would be something that gained heat to the storyline, and it does. Again, I could have hoped for more, but a 79 is a solid rating from him. Kurt is interviewed about his World Heavyweight Championship defense. Like I said, he says that he doesn't know what's going on with the number one contender situation in that other match, but his focus has always been on the task in front of him. He talks about the months of rivalry between himself and Mr. Anderson. This isn't just a few weeks thing, this goes back to Anderson first stepping foot in TNA. Angle says that he's never liked Anderson and calls him one of the most arrogant assholes that he's ever had to work with. At Sacrifice, there'll be no better time to humble Anderson, and when he locks in the ankle lock, he'll have two choices: to tap out or to have his ankle snapped, just like AJ Styles did at Lockdown. So we're still seeing that edge from Kurt Angle. He's using the fact that he broke AJ Styles' ankle in a promo. Perhaps that'll rub AJ up the wrong way as we go on in their sort of characters being, what's the word I'm looking for here? I want them to be connected storylines, almost like in a way our Brett and Sean. That might be over egging it a little bit too much, but I do think that these two having a dynamic as the two best guys who there's always going to be that competitive edge between them, both of them feeling that they are the top guy in TNA and both of them realistically have a claim to that. We then go into the main event and Bobby Lashley makes his entrance as usual, but when Samoa Joe comes down to the ring, he is stopped on the entranceway, or rather on the stage, and jumped from behind by Desmond Wolfe, a continuation of their war of words. Desmond Wolfe shows zero remorse as he grabs Samoa Joe and launches him off the stage, causing a huge crash. The idea being that Samoa Joe takes a really nasty landing and it's clear that he needs help. Desmond Wolfe watches on with a smug look on his face. Bobby Lashley, the only other person seemingly not concerned for the well-being of Samoa Joe. A group of people rush out from the back to check on him. Jeff Hardy is also one of those, but he's stopped from getting to either Desmond Wolfe, who he's furious at, or at Samoa Joe, who he wants to help. Eventually, Joe is loaded onto a stretcher and carried out of the building. The reaction of Mauro and Taz putting over just how callous the actions of Desmond Wolfe were. If anything like this happens to Jeff Hardy at Sacrifice, Desmond Wolfe will no doubt be the last man standing, and as Jeff Hardy is held back, as Desmond Wolfe is held back, there's a war of words between the two. It's not the best segment, and I would have hoped to again have a better closing segment to this Jeff Hardy Desmond Wolfe storyline that's gone on for months and months and months. Desmond Wolfe is warning Jeff Hardy that will be his fate. Perhaps more importantly, going into this, we don't seem to have a main event. Coming back from the break, Bobby Lashley is shown to have remained in the ring, and he's looking quite relaxed, having had his in-ring return called off and now potentially without a match at Sacrifice. He suggests that he has a clear path to the main event of Slammiversary. He tells all the guys in the back to look at what happens to people who cross him. This is as Samoa Joe is still being carted out of the building on a stretcher, but Bobby Lashley is more than happy to use this to warn people to stay out of his way. Of course, he had nothing to do with that. The point that he's making is that he doesn't want anybody in his way as he goes for the World Heavyweight Championship at Slammiversary. Of everybody in the back, only one man refuses to heed this warning, and at the top of the ramp, AJ Styles appears. He stares down Lashley and removes that walking boot that has assisted him since lockdown. He tears it off his boot, stamps his foot a few times to show that he can walk, but does have a little bit of a limp as he walks down to the ring. Looking to get the first shot in as he enters the ring, AJ throws a punch at Lashley, but only proves that he really isn't ready to be in the ring with him. While his shots are stiff, there's nothing wrong with the power in his punches. His movement is completely off. He can't hit and move. He can't use the abilities that have made him such an effective competitor. Of course, AJ Styles' strength over Bobby Lashley would be that he could hit him and then move and then get another shot, but Lashley's just too quick for him and takes him down fairly easily. Of course, Lashley, a very, very agile competitor, so you're going to have to be at 100% whoever you are, and AJ Styles is clearly not that. He puts a knee across the chest of AJ Styles after he's taken him down convincingly. Lashley warning AJ Styles not to come to sacrifice. If he does, Bobby is going to end his career. So Lashley making quick work of AJ Styles there, and if Styles does come to sacrifice, then we'll probably see a repeat of that. There's not much hope of AJ Styles beating Bobby Lashley, and it's probably best for everybody if he doesn't come to the pay-per-view. He's vowed to be there, he's vowed to compete, but as of this moment, even the commentators can't say for sure whether that match will take place. Nonetheless, they hype what we do have confirmed for the pay-per-view, including Kurt Angle versus Mr. Anderson, but they're sure that the Bobby Lashley and AJ Styles storyline will also develop on that show. Again, this is something that might seem a bit backwards. You're trying to get people to buy a pay-per-view, and part of the build is that we don't know if one of the matches is going to happen. I'd say it's maybe a risk to do that, but the overarching theme is that AJ Styles is going to do everything he can. He is going to fight to be at that pay-per-view. It's a really good episode of Impact, though. Second best one we've done, I think, after that post-lockdown one. I was hoping it'd beat that, especially with the solid main event, but some of the segments not living up to what I'd hoped. Again, we're having that issue with the Canadian and Australian, or is it British, I can't quite remember, not gaining any overness in those areas due to our broadcasting agreements. WWE hired Chris Gray. I suppose good for him. I'm not really familiar with him. Jeff Jarrett likes what he's hearing from Jimmy Jacobs, the two double J's helping each other out, and given that there's an argument that we could be losing faith in the New Age storyline, that is good to see, I suppose, but it is Sacrifice this Sunday. Well, next Sunday in the game, but this Sunday from when that episode of TNA Impact will air. Really looking forward to that show, partly because it will set everything into motion for Slammiversary, which is, to be fair, what I'm mostly looking forward to. I think that's going to be a huge show, a great pay-per-view. Not to undersell Sacrifice, I'll put the card up on the screen now, but it is Kurt Angle versus Mr. Anderson for the World Heavyweight Championship, and we have AJ Styles v Bobby Lashley scheduled, but it's probably fair to say that it's very unlikely that AJ Styles will be cleared to compete, so don't expect to see AJ Styles versus Bobby Lashley, or at least not how you'd expect it at the Sacrifice pay-per-view. Thanks for watching.